Hey all, Hiba here, welcome to the channel, and today I'm going to take you through the journey as a total console player, stationary console, PlayStation 5, Xbox, whatever, into the world of the Nintendo Switch. So I've been playing console games for more than 35 years, and I've always had handhelds, but they've never really been my primary platform. And again, I'm not saying that the Nintendo Switch can totally replace PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X or pretty much any other console, but I will say that these days it has become a real gnarly alternative. So I started my journey into consoles with the purchase of a Nintendo Entertainment System back in a long time ago, and then from there I moved on to the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 2 and so on. When it comes to handhelds, Game Boy, I've owned it, I've played it, lots of fun. And back in the days there were actually lots of handhelds to be had, including the Game Gear from Sega. And if we go a little bit further in the time, we go into the Sony PSP era, along with the PlayStation Vita a little bit later. The 3DS came along around the same time, and since then it's been pretty quiet with handhelds, of course if you exclude the Nintendo Switch. These days the only competition really consists of handheld PCs like the Steam Deck for example, but I don't really count these as consoles because they do in effect run PC games only, and in Steam Deck's case only Steam games unless you jailbreak it. So these days I own both a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X, and I do play them, and I also own a Switch naturally. So the PlayStation 5 is my favorite stationary console this generation, and the Xbox Series X is kinda gathering dust, at least until Indiana Jones lands. But the Nintendo Switch is my perfect addition to both consoles, and I'll tell you why in this video. So first of all, let's talk portability, and of course this is going to be a quick section because the Switch wins out here no matter what, because PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, they aren't exactly portable. Even the PlayStation Portal is kinda lacking in the fact that it doesn't actually generate the games itself, it just, streams them over Wi-Fi. Alright, next up let's talk pricing, and price has always just been, well, the price of admission to play, and it hasn't really bothered me until I saw the price for the PlayStation 5 Pro coming out later this year at $700 US. Now that's a lot. Now keep in mind this isn't a new generation, it's just a Half-Life refresh of the original PS5, and although it is more powerful, this price I think is out of proportions. So compare that for example to the price of a Switch Lite, which I know is the cheaper version, but they go for $200 per piece. So that means that you could buy 3.5 Switch Lites for the same price of a PlayStation 5 Pro. And of course if you go for the OLED model, it's at $350 US right now, but of course you can find it cheaper than that. So at a very minimum you'll be able to buy 2 Switch OLEDs for the same price as a PS5 Pro. So just to put this in perspective, remember that just one single Nintendo Switch OLED will support 2 players right out of the box. And if you spend the money to buy 2 Switches, you effectively have 2 standalone consoles that you can play either of course by yourself, but more likely with friends in the same household. Now this is a huge difference between just having one console. So now we come to the area that has always been the biggest problem for me personally with handheld consoles, and it's just the fact that, well, although they try, they cannot match the horsepower of dedicated consoles like the PlayStation 4, 5 or Xbox One or Xbox Series X. It's just not possible on a handheld platform, especially if you want to keep some sort of useful battery life. So in other words, my Switch will not completely replace my PlayStation 5 because I still want to play those new AAA games that also only come out on PlayStation 5, for example like Horizon Zero Dawn and stuff like that. But you know, multi-platform titles I actually tend to purchase for my Switch. For example, all the Lego games and stuff like that that comes out on both Xbox and PlayStation, because I would like to be able to play those things on the go, which is something that neither PlayStation 5 or Xbox X series allows. Now there is a downside, of course, because the Switch just isn't as powerful as my PlayStation 5, so you are going to pay a price in frame rate and of course visuals, because you're not going to get 4K on the Switch. You're going to get 720p if you play it in handheld mode, but on the other hand, that doesn't really matter because you only have a 7-inch screen. But then again, the fact that you only have a 7-inch screen means that you won't really notice that it's 720p. Now the frame rate is a different matter. Most of the more modern games, they can't even run on PlayStation Switch, and if they do, it's chugging along at below 30 frames per second. But of course, like I said earlier, I have my PS5 if I want to play the new Dragon Age or Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever. I save the Switch for the titles that I might not purchase on my primary, fixed console, and that means that I purchase pretty much everything else on the Switch. Alright, moving on to controls, and this is the single reason that a handheld console has never been my primary platform. Because on PlayStation and Xbox you have excellent controllers that really work well because they have just one thing to do. Now compare that to something like the PlayStation Vita, which in itself is an excellent handheld console. The controls just unfortunately let it down, and particularly the analog sticks and the general ergonomics. And unfortunately that is also the case with the Switch, at least when you play it in handheld mode. Because the controls are made to cater for many different setups, tabletop mode or multiplayer with one Joy-Con each, a lot of compromises has been made, and particularly the right side of the Switch really suffers. Like you will get very tired playing this thing if you just use the normal Joy-Cons and try to be at least competitive with these controls here. Another issue that takes a bit of getting used to, actually a lot of getting used to, is the fact that the A and the B button have switched places on Nintendo's console here, and that's actually quite annoying and one of the biggest drawbacks of the Switch, apart from the analog sticks. Now of course, if you don't care so much about handheld mode, you can sort all these problems in one go by buying a Nintendo Switch Pro controller. But if you look at something like the PlayStation Portal, the ergonomics are way better, and this thing is actually a pleasure to play on the go. Unfortunately, that's not the case for the Switch, but don't despair. The reason that the Switch has suddenly, been propelled to my top console is because I invested in some actual proper controls. Now, if you buy a third-party accessory like this, a good quality one, of course, your Switch will be instantly transformed into a very, very capable console, fully on par with your PlayStation 5 and Xbox controller, and of course also the professional conduct of you in games, especially multiplayer ones where you're up against, pretty dangerous competition. So the reason this is an option even is because you can't just, get rid or, save the original Nintendo joypads and buy these third-party accessories, which are way better and really makes this console competitive. And I'd say this is the biggest reason that the Switch is just, my number one console. Alright, that brings us on to games. And like I said earlier, you're not gonna find the latest and greatest games on the Nintendo Switch. You may be lucky too, but if you want to play Baldur's Gate 3, Dragon Age, or pretty much any of the more modern games that simply cannot be done on Switch, well, you're gonna have to play them on your PlayStation 5 or your Xbox. So if you're okay with lowering your standards just a bit, you will be able to play more recent games like, for example, Borderlands 3 on your Switch on the go, and of course also in multiplayer. And that is, in my opinion, probably the main reason, other than the controls and the price, that a Switch is such a contender. Now the Switch 2 is probably just around the corner, and I'd say with the Switch 2 you can probably expect games like Baldur's Gate 3 to be ported across, but for the time being you'll have to, sit those out unless you have a PS5 or an Xbox. So of course there's also all the Nintendo first party titles, all the Mario, all the Zelda and all that stuff, and there's usually one released every month, and they are only available on the Switch. Now that's even more exclusive than the PlayStation 5 has, and it's actually a really good reason to pick up a Switch. Now maybe not to have it as your primary console, but definitely for picking it up. Alright, so the online experience is an area where the Switch is a bit behind the other consoles if you, ignore the fact that you can actually play wireless multiplayer using two Switch or more. But if you go to the shop, the experience is quite below standard. Like, first of all, it's laggy, and it is definitely slowing its age. But that's of course not a reason not to purchase games on the store. But just remember that you will need a SD card as well, because the Switch only has 32 gigabytes of memory. Unless you purchase the OLED version, which has 64 gigabytes. Another poor aspect is the fact that voice chat is handled through a separate app while you're playing. Now this is obviously an emergency, solution from Nintendo, and I'm assuming in Switch 2 this will be built into the console. But as it is now, this is the only way, and only for some games that actually support this feature. Alright, so in the end we're gonna ask, so what? Well, I mean, if you have a PlayStation or an Xbox, you can play your nice first-party titles on that. And if you are, looking for a bargain, it's hard to get around the Nintendo Switch with the amount of fun it gives you for a very, very little price. By purchasing a third-party controller, you can overcome the inherent difficulties with actually, controlling games adequately on a handheld device. And this is, to my knowledge, the Switch is the only console that actually allows you to do this. So has my Switch completely, made me lose interest in my PS5 and my Xbox? Well, the answer is almost. I only play a few games on my PlayStation 5 these days, which is pretty much Aloy's Adventures. Everything else I play on my Switch, and I know this is quite a victory for Nintendo, because like I said, I've owned every handheld console there's been, but not one of them has actually ever really captured me the way that the Switch has. So that's definitely kudos to Nintendo here, and let me know in the comments what you think, and if you are purchasing a Nintendo Switch or if you already have one. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. And other than that, I just hope you have a nice Christmas and perhaps get some nice games in your presents. So see you out there.